This is chapter six. Existentialism is really interesting to me, mainly because I studied French existentialism. I think it was an undergraduate class. It may have been a graduate class. When my wife was stationed in California, and I was going to the University of California, Riverside. I took a class in French existentialism, found it fascinating. I've read Camus and Gide and Sartre. Anyway, this level of philosophy is really interesting to me, which doesn't really mean a whole lot potentially to you. But I enjoy it. I consider myself an existentialist, um, with little smatterings of all these individuals we're going to be talking about. Some of the things that they say I do agree with, some of them I don't. Existentialism is really not a very good, and not the good isn't what we're talking about, isn't a very extensive therapy. If you do existentialist therapy, then what you're trying to do is get them to take responsibility for their own lives. A lot of cultures don't force individuals to take responsibility for their lives, but of course, not just French existentialism, but existentialism does. So we're going to start. Let's go ahead and get started. And get started. Get started. There we go. I expanded this a little bit from what it was before. Post World War One, and we need to understand where existentialism came from. It came out of the trenches of World War One. There was just no logic to the warfare that was taking place in Europe during World War One. There were mass killings of soldiers. They would tell them to attack, not realizing, well, they did realize it, but they didn't do anything about it. They would get mowed down by machine guns. They had all this industrial technology to destroy people, and they used it. And of course, many of the generals of World War One were of the old mind, where you could overrun your enemy just by being more aggressive than they were. And of course, the French and the Germans and the British and eventually the Americans learned that, wow, that's not going to work anymore, is it? So there was a lot of concept of absurdity. We're going to talk about that anyway. It came out of the trenches of World War One. Nobody could figure out what in the world. Why in the world did we do that? That just didn't make any sense at all. It was like mass murder, continual killing, and whatnot. So there were a lot of strange ideas coming out of this. They said life is absurd. If I'm just going to waste myself on the battlefield, where we have all these men that have been butchered, literally butchered, high explosives and blown people into little bitty pieces. They just couldn't figure it out. It just didn't make any sense. And the structure of this absolute organization that they had, that was based on their religion. It was based on the social structure that existed before World War One. These monarchies, these very strict structures, they were all destroyed. Germany was destroyed. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was destroyed. Um, and now things became more democratic. And before, the individuals that were made up the armies, the foot soldiers, they were all the peasants, and now they were in charge of the governments. It was very surreal. It was very absurd. So they started all these interesting philosophical movements, and one of them, of course, was existentialism. Post-World War One, the regimented structure of Europe with its monarchies and strict control was thrown into turmoil. The German and Austrian empires collapsed and social control was eroded. Politically, Bolshevism and democracy challenged the conservative structure of the monarchies, and fascism reared its ugly head. Social absurdism, surrealism, and Dadaist ideas controlled the salons and bars of Europe. For a short time, survivor's remorse seemed to take hold of the continent, and hedonism and nihilism became the theme of the Roaring Twenties. And this is a Dadaist iron. As you can see, it's got tacks on it, so it would never work as an iron. This is surreal. This is surrealism. A snake crawling up the and becomes a candle. His nose grows into his pipe. Surrealism. Hedonism means only doing what is makes you happy. Hedonism. And nihilism is seeing that everything is going to be destroyed. Having a philosophy of destruction, absolute destruction, nihilism. But as World War II approached, common sense and a need for survival primed philosophers to, and this was in the Roaring Twenties, and one of the reasons that we don't talk about the Roaring Twenties a whole lot was because there was a lot of crazy stuff taking place. The hedonism and nihilism were two movements out of this. Of course, you had to have money to be hedonistic, so only the wealthy were able to do that. The poor people, of course, were trying to survive, and they couldn't have these negative philosophies in order to survive. And that's where the democracy took hold, and communism took hold, and fascism took hold, because those were the people that were making society actually function. So we had all this wildness taking place, this hedonism, this nihilism, and people realized, wait a minute, if we aren't careful, if we don't open our eyes, we can only be um, we can only be I'm trying to think of the word that they use for the young females. They were flappers. I'm sorry. The women were flappers, and the men were. I can't think of what they were. Wallies, I guess, was one of the words that they used, or Dannies. They were, all they were just there for a good time. But then, as World War II approached, it looked like this whole hedonistic and nihilistic idea was not going to keep humanity from self-destruction, and it looked like fascism, Bolshevism, or democracy was going to take over, and so we started looking for practicalist philosophies to carry humanity forward. We had lived 10 years of nonsense. Dadaism is, let me show you what Dadaism is. Oh, wait a minute, that's the wrong one. Dadaism. Dadaism was absurd art. Absurd art. The Dadaists, and all kinds of craziness. This stuff. Maybe. Yeah, that's Dadaist. Well, wait a minute. Let me show you something. Let me show you. This is a Dadaist sculpture. This is a urinal that's signed. Yeah, there you go. Dadaist. There you go. 1917. It's a urinal from France. Let me see if they got any more Dada. Yeah, that's the one I wanted to show you. That is a tin outfit that that individual is wearing, and he goes out and this is music, of course, and he's going to sing, and the singing that he does is not musical. It's high pitched. It's just nonsense, just ridiculousness. Let's see what else they have. There's the urinal again. You know, there's a lady as a cello. Not sure what that is. So these are all Dada. The whole idea behind Dadaism was that life is absurd, and so art should be absurd. And so there you go. Yeah. And this guy read poetry and he sung songs that weren't musical. Music at this time, some of it, well, most of it that didn't survive, of course, was a music that was cacophonous. It wasn't musical. It wasn't harmonious. So that's what Dadaism is. I've read books on Dadaism. It's really fascinating. These people are whacked. But of course, we couldn't. You can't maintain a society based on absurdity. Just doesn't make any sense. So right, but just before World War II, we started looking for practicalists, and one of them that they found was Soren Kierkegaard. He was a Danish theologian and philosopher. He had identified human angst, and angst is the emotion of dread plus anxiety. So if you put dread and anxiety together, that's what angst is. He identified the uncertainty of life and the worth of existential anxiety to force us out of our complacency and into decision making and the purpose in life. So existentialism is an anxiety that forces us into doing what we have to do in order to survive. It gives us purpose. That's what Soren Kierkegaard was saying. Another philosopher, German Friedrich Nietzsche, was had embraced for his rejection of humans as rational beings. Nietzsche saw man as a will to power and society's counter movement to invite the masses to powerlessness, a herd mentality to mediocrity. So his idea was that there was we had a need for power, but if we everybody couldn't have power, and the only people that could have power were the ones that lulled everybody into this mass of powerlessness, this herd mentality of mediocrity. Creativity and originality came from accepting our will to power. That was the Ubermensch, the individual that was the powerful one. Nietzsche, of course, saw himself and the German population as the Ubermensch, the upper man, the individuals that accepted the will to power, and the rest of the world, the Asians, the Americans, the rest of the Europeans, especially the French. He saw the French as a decadent society. These are the individuals that were maintained this herd mentality of mediocrity, to be controlled by the Ubermensch, by the will to power, the more powerful people. Nietzsche accepted man's death and felt suicide was always a viable option. As a matter of fact, Nietzsche himself was inhabited an asylum for a number of years because of his mental illness. Heidegger was another German philosopher who supported embracing the world that we found ourselves rather than maintaining any utopian desires. Of course, people were talking about utopian desires. This whole movement was looking for utopia. It was looking for hedonism. It was looking for absurdity. It saw surrealism and Dadaism. Let's just embrace the absurd. But Heidegger said, no, 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 you can't do that. You can't maintain utopian desires, you need to understand where you live. If you live in the mountains of Arizona, then you need to recognize that you live in the mountains of Arizona. If you live in the farmlands of Iowa, then you need to recognize that you live in the farmlands of Iowa. Heidegger saw men maintaining the illusion that they would live forever and rejecting the concept of death. The reality is, we live our lives. I'm 75 years old. I'm not going to live for another 50 or 60 years. That's not realistic. I know that I'm going to die sometime within, maybe the next 25 years or so. I'm 75. What do I look like when I'm 100 years old? Do I have the same intellect that I do now? And the answer is, of course not. How could I possibly? Because people, when they're 100 years old, are not quite that lucid. Heidegger supported living an authentic life of our own choosing rather than accepting a life around the expectations of others. Authenticity was his concept. That's what we need. We need to be authentic. We need to live who we are and not accept what our parents tell us they want us to be or what our advisor tells us they want us to be. We need to be who we are. We need to uh, determine who we want to be, and we need to become that person. That is the authentic man. That's what we need to strive for. We need to be authentic people. Heidegger saw authentic man striving for authentic experiences and rejecting inauthentic acceptance. And this is one of the problems with the internet. This is one of the problems with TikTok. This is one of the problems with YouTube, in that we see a video and we think we see what we should be because this person is telling us, this influencer is telling us who we need to be. But according to Heidegger, that's the very opposite of what you should do. You need to determine who you want to be, and that is your authentic man, and that is the individual that you need to become, and that's part of existentialism. Ludwig Binswanger was a Swiss psychiatrist who embraced the phenomenology of existentialism. Binswanger accepted Heidegger's idea of accepting the world that we are thrown into and maintaining the responsibility of our choices. Binswanger emphasized choice points in therapy leading to crises that must be resolved through the responsibility of the client. And Binswanger and Boss, we're going to talk about Boss next. Yeah, we're going to talk about Binswanger and Boss were two existential therapists. Binswanger was older. Boss was he was the mentor of Boss. But they came up with this existential therapy where individuals will come to therapy. They will not understand who they are. They are living other people's lives. They're living a life that they've been told that they need to live. And what they embraced Heidegger's idea of the authentic man, and that's who you need to become, and that's what they tried to lead people to in their therapy. A contemporary of Binswanger was the fellow Swiss psychiatrist Medard Boss. Boss embraced the idea of being in the world, which meant accepting the world we are in rather than desiring for something that we don't have. So if you're one of those individuals that wants to be a rock star, dude, if that's what you want to be, that's not very realistic because maybe you don't even play a musical instrument. You just want to be wealthy. Like the billionaires. Well, that's not very logical either. You need to be in the world that you are actually in. So you need to recognize who you are and recognize where you are and recognize the direction that you can take yourself, and that's the direction you need to go. His therapy technique reflected understanding the reality of where an individual found themselves rather than creating a reality of where they wanted to be. You need to know who you are and where you are, and that's what you need to embrace. Martin Buber fled Germany to live in Israel before World War II. He was Jewish, of course, obviously. He went to Israel. Buber saw man living in a between world of I and other. Buber saw man rejecting others as objects rather than selves. Buber suggested that people interject meaning into their lives by taking responsibility for everyday situations by allowing others to retain their self status. Buber saw, and of course, this is more of a urban idea as people walk down the streets and they see masses of people coming toward them. They don't see those individuals as individual selves. They see them as others. They see them as non-human, as less than human. I'm the human and you are less than that. And of course, Buber wanted them to embrace everyone as a self. Jean-Paul Sartre was a French philosopher who saw authentic man embracing the freedom to choose rather than accept the will of others. Sartre saw men accepting the ruts of inauthenticity by rejecting choice and accepting habit. Sartre saw man being by choosing every moment and rejecting the control of others over our own freedom of choice. And of course, that's Sartre. There are others that were French existentialists. Sartre was one of the main existentialists. Camus and Gide also had these ideas, and the idea was that we're in this by ourselves, and we need to, if we expect other individuals to create life for us, then we're not living our authentic self. Another psychologist, this is a more contemporary psychologist, was Viktor Frankl. He was born and educated in Vienna, Austria. As a Jew, he was incarcerated by Nazi concentration camps. In Nazi concentration camps during World War II for 3 years. He was in concentration camps for 3 years. His family, including his parents, his wife, and his children, were all executed in the camps. Even this did not destroy his enthusiasm for life. Frankl observed and experienced the existential philosophical principle that we have choices in every situation and we have to make authentic choices. And that's Frankl coming out of the camps. Frankl found that we can preserve a vestige of spiritual freedom and independence of mind. Frankl believed that the essence of being human lies in searching for meaning and purpose. We discover meaning in our actions and deeds by experiencing values such as love and by suffering. Frankl started as a psychoanalyst but diverted from Freud after the war to develop his own theories based on freedom, responsibility, meaning, and the search for values. And that is the essence of existentialism. Responsibility, finding meaning in life, and searching for values. Frankl developed logotherapy, or therapy through meaning, whose central themes were life has meaning, the motivation of life is the will to find meaning, we have the freedom to find meaning, we must integrate body, mind, and spirit to be fully alive. And of course, surviving in a concentration camp where you're starving to death is not the easiest thing in the world. Frankl often saw modern people having the means to live, but no meaning to live for. In other words, you need to find a reason to be alive. My reason to be alive is to teach you guys. So I'm a pretty good existentialist. Rollo May is another existential therapist who lived in Ohio and Michigan as a child, one of 7 children. After graduating from college, May studied with Adler in Vienna, where he studied theology as well as psychology. Yeah, Rollo May is really interesting because he became an ordained minister and then he became an existentialist, which doesn't fit. But May chose psychology over theology as the best way to help people. May credits the writings of Soren Kierkegaard and the mentoring of Paul Tillich for bolstering his existential understanding of philosophy, religion, and psychology. May's existentialism is concerned with the nature of human experience, recognizing and dealing with power, accepting freedom and responsibility, discovering one's identity. May believed that psychotherapy should aim to help people discover the meaning of their lives and should be concerned with the problems of being rather than with problem solving. You need to be, is Rollo May's point. May felt that it took courage to be, and our choices determine the person that we become. Questions of being include learning to deal with issues such as sex and intimacy. May had a terrible time with his marriages. He was married twice and he was divorced twice. With growing old, accepting death, facing death, and taking action in the world. May felt that the ultimate challenge was being alone, as we all are, and facing death. And yeah, anyway, that's Rollo May. Irvin Yalom was born and grew up in Washington, D.C. He grew up in a dangerous neighborhood and developed his existential philosophy from fiction, his medical experience, and his early experiences with psychotherapy. Yalom has developed four givens of existence: freedom and responsibilities, existential isolation, meaninglessness, and death. And of course, you're seeing a common theme here: freedom and responsibility. The fact that you're an individualist, you're in isolation, and rejecting this concept of meaninglessness and accepting death. These are all very common themes in existential philosophy and therapy. Yalom believes that the vast majority of experienced therapists, regardless of their theoretical orientation, address these core existential themes. How these existential themes are addressed influences the design and the quality of people's lives. Yalom listens to clients' unique stories and uses the therapeutic relationship to explore the client's interpersonal world. James Bugenthal was an American psychologist from Ohio who championed existential therapy throughout the late 20th century. He did most of his therapy in California. But once again, here's a guy from Ohio. Bugenthal encouraged clients to examine their lives and gear their minds to live more authentic lives. Bugenthal encouraged an existential humanistic approach that created an environment of equality between therapist and client, which he referred to as presence. If you look at therapy, the client is subordinate to the therapist, but what Bugenthal tried to do, he tried to make them equal, and he called presence. Bugenthal developed interventions to help the client deepen their understanding of themselves as a process called searching. Bugenthal felt that most clients resisted discoveries during the searching process because they maintained illusory ideas of themselves dictated by society in a self and world construct. Resistance took the form of intellectualizing argumentativeness, seeking to please, and any other life-limiting pattern. Amy van Deurzen is an English philosopher and existentialist known for her extensive teaching and training of existential therapy. Deurzen, and I would put a van in front of this, but your author said did not. Van Deurzen, I would call her Van Deurzen, but your author didn't, so I'm not going to. Van Deurzen just means from Deurzen, of Deurzen is what Van means, or Van and Von. Deurzen feels that existential therapy is not designed to cure people in a medical model sense because people aren't sick, but sick of life or clumsy at living. Deurzen's psychotherapy helps people display resilience and intelligence once they commit themselves to a self-searching process. Deurzen helps clients redefine past hardships into new patterns of understanding rather than the negative interpretations that society labels. Deurzen's clients recognize the paradoxes and contradictions of life to face their troubles and solve dilemmas. Her clients discover what is truly important in life. And she likes color, obviously. Existential therapy does not identify with a stock set of techniques of therapy. Instead, it bases therapeutic practice on an understanding of what it means to be human. The movement stands for what it means to be human, respect for the person, exploring new aspects of human behavior, divergent methods of understanding people. The focus on the existential approach is on clients who feel alone in the world and are facing the anxiety of this isolation. Existential practitioners are trying to understand these deep human experiences. Existentialists view human nature as not fixed but continually being recreated through new projects. Humans are in a constant state of transition, emerging, evolving, and becoming. As humans, we must constantly seek the logic and sense of our existence and meaning of actions in the world. And of course, with the internet and with TikTok and whatnot, X and I don't know, all the other things. We have a lot of people telling us what we should think and what we shouldn't think. But existentialism wants you to think of who you are. You need to decide who you are. You don't need a religion telling you who you are. You don't need a political ideal telling you who you are. You need to determine this by yourself, and then you'll be happy. Dimensions of the human condition, the capacity of self awareness, freedom and responsibility, creating one's identity and establishing meaningful relationships with others, the search for meaning, purpose, values, and goals, anxiety as a condition of living, awareness of death and non being. And here's a man behind barbed wire. The greater our awareness, the greater our possibilities for freedom. To expand our awareness, we must become aware that we are finite, so we may not have the time. We can either act or not act. Inaction is a decision. We choose our actions, thus, we partially create our own destiny. Meaning must be searched for and discovered. It is unique. Existential anxiety is our awareness of our own freedom. We are responsible for our own choices. We are subject to loneliness, meaninglessness, emptiness, guilt, and isolation. We are basically alone, but we may choose to be with others. And this is a movie, Japanese movie called The Human Condition. In counseling, the client may become aware that they are trading the security of awareness for the anxiety of choosing. They are seeking the approval of others and allowing others to define them rather than looking to themselves for affirmation. They may be living their lives based on past decisions while they can make new decisions if they choose. While they cannot change the past, they can change the way they react to events in their past. They can learn from the past and reshape the future. They may be so preoccupied with death they do not appreciate life. They do not have to be perfect to feel worthy. They have limitations. Because they are living in the past or planning for the future, they fail to live in the present. And these are the dilemmas of self awareness. Janice, if I had just gone to law school when I had the opportunity, life would be so much better. The therapist says, why don't you go now? Janice, it's too late. I have my life as a wife, mother, and the manager of Ben Franklin's, and I couldn't put my family through that. I wish John had not gotten me pregnant. The therapist says, you didn't want to have sex? Well, sure, but I didn't want to get pregnant. I'll never forgive John for that. And the therapist says, I'm confused. Why is it John's fault? And Jenna says, I see what you mean. Yes, I was as much to blame. No, it is something that I did, and I'm not bad because of it, only human. I cannot make my future if I don't control the present. And that is existentialism. One of the major themes of existential theory is that people are free to choose among alternatives and therefore have a large role in shaping their destinies. People must realize that each of us has the power of choice at many junctures of our lives, and that equates into freedom. However, with this freedom comes a responsibility for directing our own lives. We can avoid responsibility by making excuses or the inauthenticity of bad faith. We are constantly confronted with what kind of person we are going to become, and existence is accepting the freedom of choice. And I can give you an example from my own life. When I was in the military, I I didn't have a wife. She left me and left me with the two kids, and they became the focal point of my life. I wanted to make sure that they were taken care of. I was still in the military. I was a laboratory technician, and I was really good at my job. And the military recognized that I was really good at my job, and they offered to send me to medical school. And at that point, I had to decide, well, what will I do? Do I take care of my children? Do I make sure my children are taken care of? Or do I go to medical school? I always, I wanted to go to medical school, but I chose to not go to medical school and make sure that my children were taken care of first. That's what I did. Now, I can always look back and say, oh man, I could have been a doctor. I could be wealthy. I could look back and do that. Or I can say, I made a choice and I think I made the best choice because my two kids turned out really well. If I'd been a doctor, would I have been able to spend as much time with my kids? And the answer is probably no. So looking back, I think I made the right choice. But I don't really look back because when I did it, that was an authentic choice. It was an authentic choice, and I made that decision, and now I'm perfectly happy with my decision because I've lived an authentic life. We are responsible for our own lives, our own actions, but especially for our failures to take action. Evading a commitment or choosing not to choose is existential guilt. We experience existential guilt when we do not make choices or allow others to define us. We do not live authentically. To an existentialist, making choices and taking responsibility is freedom, and being free is being human. Clients who refuse to take responsibility for their choices are being inauthentic, and this is what the therapist is there to point out to them. They're always looking in the past and saying, oh, woe is me. Well, you made a choice. And if you accept that choice, then you're living an authentic life. If you look back and feel guilty, then you're not. You're suffering from existential guilt. The task of a therapist is to invite the client to recognize how they have allowed others to decide for them and encourage them to take steps toward autonomy. People who need to make contact with others in nature while preserving uniqueness and centeredness. Many existential writers discuss being disconnected from others in order to be allowed to develop their identity, and they describe the dilemma in terms of loneliness, uprootedness, and alienation. If we do seek directions, answers, and beliefs from others rather than trusting ourselves, we are in danger of losing our identity because we allow others to identify, to dictate who we are. Existentialists try to give clients the courage to be. Therapists invite clients to see themselves as the sum of others' expectations and the mere interjections of their parents. The free part of the human condition is the experience of aloneness. Since authenticity is looking to yourself to derive strength, it often gives you a feeling of separation. We must be able to tolerate being alone with ourselves. We can only look to ourselves for confirmation. Existentialists feel that we have to be able to stand alone and find strength within ourselves before we can establish a relationship with others. This way, our relationship is based on our own fulfillment, not our deprivation. Therapy seeks to show those in the dependent relationship that strength of self can be life affirming for both individuals. Struggling with our identity, it is frightening to give up who we are and seek a new, unique person. Often it is easier and more comfortable to continue identifying with the identity we acquired in early childhood. We get trapped in doing the things that cheerleaders do or hoods, and not experiencing being, allowing our identities to evolve. Therapy involves challenging clients to examine how they lost touch with their identity by allowing others to design their life for them. People are constantly asking the existential questions. Why am I here? What do I want from life? What gives my life purpose? Where is the source of meaning for me in life? The therapist, in turn, can ask, do you like the direction of your life? Are you pleased with what you now are and what you are becoming? If you are confused about who you are and what you want for yourself, what are you doing to get some clarity? If the client discards their old value systems, they often do this without finding a new value system to replace it. They may experience a value vacuum. The therapist's job is to help them create their own value system, but to trust that they will derive a value system that provides meaning in their life. And this is really kind of strange because I had a track coach when I was in college who told me that everybody needed to develop their own values, their own value system. And I've always done that, just because Coach Huntsman told me I needed to, but because it made so much sense to me. All these other individuals were living and developing their lives based on what other people thought. And the coach told me that I needed to determine myself who I wanted to be and what my value system was. Anxiety arises from the struggle for survival and asserts one's individuality. It is an inevitable part of the human condition. Anxiety. Existential therapists see normal anxiety as an appropriate response to an event being faced. This kind of anxiety can be used as motivation to change. Neurotic anxiety is out of proportion to the situation. It is out of awareness. It tends to immobilize the individual. Therapy involves helping a client come to terms with the paradoxes of existence, life and death, success and failure, freedom and limitations, certainty and doubt. It is not the aim of existential therapy to eliminate anxiety from your life. Anxiety is good. Anxiety tells you that you need to struggle. To do so would be to take away the struggle, to remove the vitality. Counselors encourage clients to develop the courage to face life squarely by taking a stance, performing an action, making a decision. A client's anxiety is due to the change, and to hide from it is to hide from life. The essence of life is struggle, and we need to continue doing it. Without a struggle, there's no meaning in life. As humans, we are aware of our own mortality. It is necessary to think about death if we're to think significantly about life. If we repress this reality, we fear this reality, our life becomes insipid and meaningless. Our awareness of death is a source of zest for life and creativity. If we affirm life and live in the present as fully as possible, we will not be obsessed with the end of life. We will accept it. Existential therapy is best considered as an invitation to the client to recognize the ways in which we are not living full, authentic lives and to make choices that will lead to their becoming what they are capable of being. The therapy challenges them to seek freedom and experience the anxiety from their new choices and directions. Embrace the anxiety. Existential therapists are primarily concerned with understanding the subjective world of clients to help them come to a new understandings and options. Throughout the therapeutic process, techniques are secondary to establishing a relationship that will enable the counselor to effectively challenge and understand the client. When clients complain about the predicament that they are in and blame others, the therapist is likely to ask them how they contributed to this situation. Clients are challenged to take responsibility for how they choose to be in the world. Clients are expected to go out in the world and decide how they will live differently. The clients must be active in the therapeutic process, for during sessions they must decide what fears, guilt, and anxieties they will explore. Gradually, they become aware of what they have been and who they are now, and they are better able to decide what kind of future they want. Therapy is a journey taken by the therapist and client, a journey that delves deeply into the world as perceived and experienced by the client. In achieving the goal of assisting clients to confront ways that they are experiencing stuckness in their life, it is essential for the counselor to adopt a flexible style and to draw from different theoretical approaches with different clients. The core of the therapeutic relationship is respect, which implies faith in the client's potential to cope authentically with their troubles and their ability to discover alternative ways of being. The counselor feels that one of Stan's problems is that he has lived his life in contrast to others. He has not made authentic choices. Stan has lived a life where he has not taken responsibility for his own life, but has adopted the victim mentality. The therapist confronts Stan's alcohol and drug use as an attempt to escape from his freedom and responsibility. The therapist points out to Stan that anxiety is a necessary part of life. Because Stan is ultimately alone, as is everyone, he has to expect to experience some degree of healthy anxiety, aloneness, guilt, and even despair. To existential therapists, a client who threatens suicide may be actually saying, "I am as good as dead," because of their inauthentic choices. The therapist confronts Stan saying, "Living the life you are living and taking the drugs you are taking, it is as if you are dead and just going through the motions of dead." Stan is now condemned to a life of isolation, alienation, and loneliness. The therapist helps Stan discover his own centeredness in life by values he chooses and creates for himself. Stan learns to appreciate himself more. With this appreciation, it is less likely that Stan will have the clinging need to secure approval from others, particularly his parents and his parental substitutes. Stan relates to others out of his strength rather than dependence. And that is the end of the chapter. And as I told you, I haven't always considered myself an existentialist, but I found when I first read Camus when I was in college, I found it the absurdity of life and the taking responsibility for everything in your life. I found that a very telling thing. I came from a family of six, and as a middle child, I needed to find my own direction beyond my own family, and I've always tried to live a life that was authentic. And I've always accepted the responsibility of my actions. And that's not easy. It's not easy for people because they want to blame other people for their problems. So there you go. That's existentialism. Next week we'll tackle reality therapy, I think.